So this video I'm going to try and go over what I call Trinity flux and neural kinetics, which is a sort of language that I've come up with. So the same way that like language uses symbols to represent experiences and sounds and concepts, I've created what I'll call like a meta language. And so it involves concepts that are a fusion of concepts from philosophy, biology, and sort of spirituality and scientific materialism. And by that I mean scientific materialism that sees electromagnetism, gravity, resonance, and biology, DNA, and all that. So that type of stuff combined with basically a type of object ontology. So what is an object? Like, what are we doing when we're referencing anything, be it love or a box or like a cat? Like, what exactly is an object in our language? Because if we don't know how we're creating the idea of an object, right, how are we thinking, we can't really know what we're thinking about. And so this language lets you do pretty cool things, including you can kind of, just by understanding sort of all of this stuff, you can let go of the perception or belief and scale, right? So I'm not saying scale and distance and time and space aren't real, but this sort of perceptual exercise kind of lets you drop all that, and then you can kind of look at reality without a scale to it. So literally you are everything. You can look at it that way, and it's kind of fun because it just gives you these cool little ideas and these insights, and you can see different patterns and stuff. And it's wild, but it's not true any more than the like the word cat is true. You know, like when I say the word cat, is that true or not? I don't know. Is it a real thing? I don't know. Like, it's just an idea, I guess. So this is all just sort of an idea. But it gets into, I think one of the things that I want to talk about was near-death experiences. So like sort of what happens when we die, like why do all those experiences happen, where people come back and they've seen certain things, like where do they come from, where did they go, that type of thing, and sort of what happens in meditative states and what chi is, and consciousness, and gravity, electromagnetism, and force, and all that. So we're just going to kind of see how all that stuff like interconnects and is related to each other in a way. I'm going to go over this quickly with, here we go. Okay, so to start all of this out, we're going to be working initially with this symbol, and this is physics. So we're going to be starting with physics. The reason I am using this symbol, though, is based on words, because with physics we're talking about matter and energy, and those are already two objects that we've made in our language. So the reason I'm starting with the symbol is because of going into the understanding of how we create objects in our language. And I've written two short books, really, or essays on that logic and that reasoning and how I've come to use this symbol. So I'm going to have to tell you that this symbol is sort of a symbol for how force, gravity, time, and space operates. It's also a symbol for how we think. And this symbol is also has the exact same properties of DNA. like it pairs with itself and forms long chains, which I get into the logic of how it does that as a thought object to create objects. And the way that it does that has all the exact same properties of DNA. So in a way it's a symbol for DNA, like the behavior of DNA. So this symbol is a symbol for that, and it's also a symbol for how we create perceptions. And then that lets us have it be a symbol for sort of life, which is what we are because our DNA is in the middle. So this is all sort of just a symbol for what's happening. And to understand this symbol, we have to go into sort of what the symbol means. So this is positive and negative charges. So this is anytime things are sort of like kept apart. And when they're kept apart, when positive and negative are actually kept apart, you get this sort of electromagnetic energy. And so this is all particles that we see in the universe that are charged. You have positive atoms and neutral electrons. And these things like to go from positive to negative. They want to get kept together. But when they're apart, there's like potential energy stored in those things being separated. Right? So you get the positive and negative apart, and then you have the electromagnetic force in there, and then when you split that apart again, you get the strong force, photons, and then these two parts are energy and time. So energy and time pops up, and then you basically get movement and matter, or space and objects, right? So to have an object, you have to have space, and to have space, you have to have an object. So you get force and time, and then space and objects pop up, and in between that is the strong force, the weak force, and then sort of a void force of like, where did this all come from? Basically thinking. So we get into all of that in a different video and also in those other ones, but this thing pairs with itself in long chains, and so it gets DNA. So where we're really starting, there's a lot of philosophy that you have to go through to get into how thinking and DNA are the exact same thing. They're a self-similar fractal. But basically that's the foundational premise, and I'm sorry I got so like, if that didn't make any sense, it's because it's a nuanced sort of thing that you have to basically read to get to understand how DNA is a self-similar fractal with thought. Right, DNA does this pairing mechanism just like your thinking does to create objects. And DNA is in the center of every cell in the body, and it's wrapped around these histones. So when the DNA is not being expressed, it wraps around these histone proteins, I believe they're called. And these proteins have an internal shape that is like that. So inside of each one of these little tennis ball looking things, the protein shape is this coil. And notice how it does this interesting coiling mechanism and a spiraling mechanism. So it's kind of a 3D coil. So there's a protein 3D coil in the middle of the DNA, which is a charged particle, and then that DNA itself coils sort of twice around each of these charged particles. And then these balls, these units, all kind of coil together, and they call them solenoids. And that solenoid coils again, sort of like a telephone cord coiling again. And all of this is sort of electromagnetic and charged, you know, because the idea of scale is it's not real. So like at the scale that all this is operating at, which these are just all molecules, you're looking at electrons flying all about. You know, just sort of picture this stuff, because they know in chemistry and physics, when you're ripping apart these atoms and these molecules that make up DNA, they're going crazy. Like, there's so much energy flying around in the electrons and the quarks and the vibration at that level. And there's just tons of electromagnetism there. So at DNA, which we can see, like we can perceptually see the DNA. And at the scale that the DNA is wrapped, like this stuff, it's wrapped in basically an antenna array and a power array. Like if you were wrapping these charged particles, you know, imagine, just look at like what's wrapped there, like the way that these things are wrapped in the DNA. And then we know from when we look into the physics and we're studying the wave-slit particle duality, like at the scale that this stuff is wound, that bilocation probability cloud stuff is interacting with itself. Like you've got an antenna to where all those molecules and stuff are coiled around themselves so much that the quantum effects are very real. So the DNA that's doing all of our expression and is bound really well isn't experiencing a ton of movement and energy in that at that quantum scale. In its fully coiled state is when it's most entangled with itself. So that DNA is like very packed, and we know this. This is fact. Like, you don't have to go and like look it up. This is standard human mythology, or with the physics and all that. So it's in there, and this thing is the center of all of us, expressing all the cells and everything. And so we're wondering, what's the unification between understanding what the hell's going on with all the quantum effects, the quantum mechanics stuff, the time's going backwards, there's no relation to it, entangled everything, whoa, crazy, you know, physics stuff. How do we unify that with, like, I'm falling in love and philosophy and peak experiences and all that? So I'm kind of doing this language is to talk about big things like life, unification theories. So we can actually start to see how everything is self-similar. So this gets into how we drop our sense of time and scale, is because we can see how we actually go into that quantum foam to where it's eternal and strange and all that. So it's coiled, and then, you know, just go read a book about how tightly wrapped DNA is and how it's wrapped around these centromeres and coiled with itself and expressing and doing all these other things. And then it's, you know, it's wrapped around that, which itself, these are all different protein units which have a crazy shape, right? All these protein units, you can look them up. All the amino acids, this is made of amino acids. You go look at the shape of those things and you realize they're doing all that quantum craziness. And the DNA is wrapped around that quantum craziness. You got to look at it at the scale that we know that it's moving. When they look at these proteins, they're going, fuck, crazy. It's not like those animations to where these are like inert, like blocks is moving around. Everyone treats molecules and DNA and stuff as if it was like a marker. Like, we know what it's doing at this. If you blew this molecule up such that the scale of it was the scale of this marker, which is how we're thinking about it right now, it would be going. It would explode your brain to look at it. Right? All of this DNA and everything, if you imagine it moving on the scale that these structures are built, if you imagine how it's moving on the scale that we know the structures are built, it would explode your mind. It breaks all logical laws of reality. Like, you look at all of the experiments in physics, and they don't make any sense. So we know that at the way that the DNA is behaving, at the level that we understand, we know that it's having interactions with itself that do not make any sense, but it's affecting the DNA, which is expressing everything. Our DNA expression determines everything about us, and we know that it's experiencing an innumerable amount of quantum effects that's changing that expression. Because if you're gonna make models like this is what biology has figured out. if you're going to make models of the DNA like this, you also have to take into account how it's moving at that scale that you've blown it up. You don't get to blow up the DNA to this big and not take into consideration how crazy it's moving at that scale and then still use the model. Like, this model is useless unless it understands the movement at that level, the vibratory movement at that level. So for this model to have any meaning, you have to treat it as like this crazy electromagnetic game going on at the center of every cell. And so when it's wrapped, that's when those effects are most prominent. When the DNA is not being expressed, it's most coiled, that's where it's getting the most entanglement. And so it's a giant quantum entangled, like, telephone, power generator, like whatever. It can harvest energy from the phone. If you were going to try and design a quantum computer or a quantum anything, it would have to be designed like this. It would have to be wound and packed and so that everything could communicate, but still have like a sort of a sequence or a linearity to it, so it could take all of that chaos and then spit it out into something that's like comprehensible. It would have to be designed by DNA, which is once you unstring it, it makes perfect sense. It behaves like basically a Newtonian block. When you look at DNA and you're unstringing it as an object, it's physical. That's why we can work with it. But when you wrap that thing up, it's suddenly at the inside at these points, this linear thing is interacting with itself in a quantum way. So that means that the end of the strand is quantumly entangled with the beginning of the strand. So this is how, in these deep meditative states, when we really fall into ourselves and we relax, which causes the DNA to not express itself, things get a little bit fuzzy, because the thing that's at the very middle of you is doing some crazy stuff that we know that it's allowed to do. Like, that's not breaking any physical laws. So for you to have an experience of before and after is not breaking any laws. The DNA does it all the time. And so you are the DNA. And the DNA is looking out, and like it's a quantum entangle. So it's quantum entangled. So at that level, the DNA segment that's in this cell is more or less functionally identical, tuned into the exact same frequency, quantumly vibrating in the same way as the cell over here. All these different things are sort of entangled, so they're talking. These are resonantly linked. And so these are the cells in your body, roughly, and they're at the middle. They're surrounded by a nucleus. And these cell membranes that the DNA is wrapped in, so the DNA is there, and what's the DNA inside of? It's inside of cells. Okay, so how are cells working? This is a model of the membrane of the cell. And the cells have what's called a resting membrane potential. So there's a charge differential across the membrane. There's a bunch of basically negative ions on the inside, and there's a bunch of positive ions on the outside. This establishes a resting membrane potential, they'll call it. But it's actually a flux capacitor, which means an insulator that has a charge on one side and there's a negative side on the other one. So there's an electromagnetic field here in between the cells. These particles are attracted to each other. And so you get, anytime that there's a particle attraction, if there's any sort of current flow, you get an electromagnetic field popping up, and then if that current flows enough, you get like light being emitted. And so the DNA is wrapped essentially in this. And this cell membrane is very fluid. If you look at it under a microscope, it looks like the surface of an ocean. And it's comprised of lipids. So there's lipids in here. And it floats, and it's very fluid. It's very, very fluid. In animal cells, anyway. And so as it's fluid, the mechanical nature of it flops, and that changes the distance of the magnets. Imagine you had this fluid medium And there were imagine on the ocean you had some buoys, and they were like magnetically attracted to each other. The buoys were, but they were also they would have a tendency to sink as well, and so they would sink to like this balance point between the buoys, like if it compressed the water, And so then when they move and they sort of separate, those charges tend to want it. That movement can knock the charges away, and then they'll want to come back together. So the field, basically, what I'm trying to say is the field fluxes from various stimuli, especially nerves. Right, so since there's a magnetic field and all these charged particles, they're going to respond to magnetic fields because charged particles respond to magnetic fields. So these magnetic fields given off by nerves and other things in the body are going to cause that magnetic field to move, and that's going to move the particles. So you get this like flux. I call it a flux field. In this flux field, you got to look at the electromagnetic environment around every single cell, and you're getting electromagnetic and mechanical disturbances from all these different sources. Your brain, especially, your brain's sending off action potentials that are like giant EMP bursts. Your organs are they're all generating electromagnetic fields. The heart is, your muscles are generating electromagnetic fields and mechanically distorting everything. The organs are all mechanically distorting everything. So the mechanical distortions causes the charge relationships to change. And this is all waving and fluid-like around each cell. And so you're looking out at these patterns, and this waving generates a frequency pattern. The wave is coming or going, and so you can look at it. You look at that wave. This is the surface of the cell is kind of the lost my main slide. The TV screen of life. So you're looking at these waves, and you see movement, and this is the stuff that you see objects with. You see objects in that boundary. So when we look at the universe, and you're asking about like what's membrane theory. Membrane theory is that the whole universe exists on a membrane, and it does. That membrane is anything and everything that holds two charged objects apart. It forms a flux capacitor. Anything that holds two charged objects apart is a membrane. And so since that membrane then, when it's holding objects apart, it responds to both energetic electromagnetic stimulation and mechanical stimulation. So you're the DNA, you're surrounded by this like ocean that responds to electromagnetic and mechanical events. In the nucleus, it does this, and then this outer cell does this. And so this is kind of your reality. And you look at that, and as a kid, or as a little baby DNA, you come out and you learn to like start looking at this thing. The thing is that at that quantum level, where your DNA is all wrapped like this, it's entangled with itself. So you are looking out from every single cell in your body. They're entangled. At the level that it's entangled, you're looking at every single cell in the body. And then the world that you're putting together right now is an interference pattern or an entanglement of all of that. So you're looking at cells that are responding to like your eyes and to your foot sensation and everything. And so what is that foot sensation and everything? Your nerves go off, and it changes the mechanical distortion of everything in here, right? And it's just sending action potentials down my hand, and these things are going off along the entire length of the nerve. The nerve is myelinated, and so it's going all the way up, a cascade up through your spinal cord and into your brain. And this puts a wave interference pattern on the surface of the cell. As it goes off, it's setting off and making ripples and waves around the surface of the cell, which causes these vibrations. And so what the brain does is it redistributes the vibrations so that all the cells are seeing roughly the same thing, so that their DNA is sort of, the expression, what's going on outside changes how the DNA needs to be expressed. So the organs and everything, the rhythmic nature of the organs makes it such that all the DNA in the body is being similarly expressed. Like if the DNA in each cell is like expressing different things, then different parts of it is going to be entangled. And if that expression changes too much, like if what the surface of each cell is doing changes too much from that of like the neighboring environments, like if the head starts receiving a totally different signal than the foot, that will cause the genetic expression inside of those cells to have to change to survive. If they change too much, they lose that quantum entanglement, instant communication, telepathy between the head and the foot. There's just not as much bandwidth that's able to be shared by that instantaneous connection. And so that's the main function of the rhythmic organs, especially the heart. It makes it so that the surface of all the cells looks the same, and that allows that particular aspects of the DNA to be silent or dormant in every cell in the body that can feel the electromagnetic and the mechanical pulse of the heart. That lets it so that every single cell in the body has the exact same expression to deal with that thing. So then they have little antennas. Instantaneous communication. No hormones needed, no nerves needed, nothing needed. The brain is supposed to sense what anything is doing. The nervous system, right? This goes up to my head and it goes in there, and then that relays out to the rest of the body. So when my nervous system is feeling, it is making it such that the rest of the body feels what the rest of the body is doing, such that they can all respond to the exact same stimulus and shut down even more of the DNA, or have the same types of DNA active or dormant. The nervous system is trying to make it such that every single cell in the body experiences the exact same thing at the same time or close to it all the time, such the DNA starts to be similarly expressed. What this does is it makes it such that every single cell in the body is instantaneously entangled, which allows for unprecedented degrees of networking and communication, because the body has to function as a whole system. So that's the job of the brain. And the job of the heart is to make sure that no matter how off the brain gets it, no matter how like, oh, nope, that was right, the heart keeps everything alive, along with the lungs is basically just a big old tide that goes in and out. You use the air as a tide. If everything's incoherent, you don't really need to use that much oxygen. So the breath is really a creation of this. There's a rhythmic in and out. And the nerves are also a rhythmic in and out. And so the job of the nervous system and the brain is to turn this like non-rhythmic existence of like this chaos and turn it into a rhythmic tide that can be harvested for sort of energy. And the organs are that backup system. So the organs are a backup system, and they just make it such that every cell in the body experiences enough that it can become entangled, and that entanglement enhances the activity and the strength recruitment of the cell. As you get higher and higher levels of entanglement, you get higher and higher levels of efficiency in the body, and the ability, as the DNA gets more and more tangled, it starts to make it such that force can be transmitted through that sort of quantum entanglement. So when you're doing Tai Chi, Qigong, martial arts, whatever, you can kind of make it so that your whole body, or all the energy in the body, or all the energy in every cell, can sort of manifest in a particular way out of a particular limb. But it requires kind of cohesion. And that's the Qi or the Shakti Pa energy or whatever. When people are really good at this, they can like start harvesting. And remember, if you get coordinated enough, you're dealing with quantum effects. So you're capable of actually harvesting energy out of the sort of 0-point foam, which is what's keeping everyone alive anyway. Food is also a way that brings everything into sort of resonance. You're just having to get energy to maintain this electromagnetic flux. Most of the metabolism of the cell takes place on the membrane of it. All of the ion, protein transports, and so this electromagnetic flux even powers this sort of physical reality here. Not so much food, right? So that's what you're kind of looking out at, and this is the inner layer, so you have to kind of piece together reality. You have this outer world of reality that you perceive, and it seems to be mechanically attached to something too, like it's outside of you, like it responds to mechanical influence. And the only thing that really responds to mechanical influence that is like totally outside of your jurisdiction is this outer world. So that's why this is the outer world. The inner world that you directly control, you directly connect to, is sort of your thoughts and where you're placing your attention. So the only thing that you can directly control is what you're thinking and you're intending. Like nobody can stop you from doing that. They can't grab your physical body. So your physical body is still this, because somebody can grab it and change it. This is your sort of mental body, or yourself. And then your DNA is directly mechanically attached to it, and also all of that quantum electromagnetic movement craziness right next to it. So this is like, the DNA is actually really closely mechanically tethered and quantumly untethered. So this is your thinking, anything that you can control, like really directly, just with intent, just by changing how you're expressing yourself. Like your voice is very close to this. Like how you can just kind of change how you're expressing yourself. You can start making different noises almost no matter what. And then that leads right, that's why sound and vocal intonation leads directly into the mind, or the mental realm, or words. Because I can be talking sentences, but even if you were to tape my mouth shut, I just thought I can be talking sentences. Nobody can stop that. And then this is where everything else takes place. And so remember, every single cell in your body is putting together this picture individually. Individually, every cell is putting together this picture. And then they're entangled quantumly to put together the whole picture of the body. So as long as you identify as the body, the quantum entangled picture that you'll see is of the average of all of this. As long as you're identified as the body, you are the average of all of it. And this is the Atman, or the Godhead, or the whatever, is the average of whatever it's choosing to identify as. That's how you're going to perceive the world, is really the average of how you choose to identify. So when you really make a shift in consciousness or perception, you start to identify as the average of the we space. So that's where you're letting go of self-importance. And then you can start to entangle, or be the entangled part between two individuals, or you and another object. But you have to lose the self-importance that was anchored to where you're the average of all of these cells. You have to be the average of that and that. But you're just sort of the average. So every cell in the body is working together, and then the average of that, so what your eyes are doing, your legs, your brain, and all that. And then you remember, your brain is also this interesting organ, and it's very much fractally related to the sense of self of all this, the sense of I'm the average, right? The brain is related to that because it's literally taking in all of the nerve impulses and the signals and everything and sending it out to all the cells as best as it can to try and average out the sensation between all of them. Which isn't really true. So if the brain's like trying to average them, trying to have a thing, it screws up everything. This is why the trying and the effort and to figure things out in a particular way causes a little it causes a feedback loop which results in the ego thing. The brain is literally sort of the highest organ as far as the coherence that it's having. The heart is extremely powerful, which is why it just keeps the rhythm going, and why it's obvious the heart seems to be important in the middle of everything. And in a way it is. So all these three centers, the reason that they're so important and so powerful is that they cause this average coherence. But the mind has this like ability to take in and look at things that are not itself, right? The heart never has to deal with anything other than itself. The mind is constantly taking in things that are not itself, and it's supposed to be using what's not the self to like cause even more energy to come into the self. Unfortunately, it can kind of get a little bit crazy and start reacting to things that don't exist, like the self. And this causes the cells in the body to not be in coherence. When the mind just kind of like goes loosey-goosey, it's not trying to get into coherence with anything. It's actually just a sensitive like thing that can almost resonate with anything. The mind is so flexible that if it just relaxes, it's firing on all these different centers of the brain are firing in these feedback loops that take in the outside information through the senses. And as it takes it in, it naturally creates these waves that cause it to enter into like sort of harmonic convergence with all of the different sensory information that's coming in. And that gets everything into a resonance, not only with the body, but how the body is moving, because how the body is moving is in relation to everything else and in relation to all the objects around it. So this relaxation, the resonance is almost like allowed to play with itself in this very, very adaptive way with something else. But if that process starts to try, because it can't try, like the brain came from all of this stuff, so if it just feels into it will naturally start to build up more and more and more and more and more, because it's adapted to do that. It's adapted to like resonate with itself. All these parts are literally designed in a way to resonate with each other. That's how everything functions. So the brain was designed to resonate with the world that it's sensing and just let that feedback loop start to funnel more and more and more energy into the body. And so it's painting the same picture on every single cell, because before this, the picture that the cells were getting were that of their own nature. When the brain starts going, every cell in the body gets sort of like almost the exact same picture, which then the DNA folds. And what this does is suddenly you don't even need the nervous system anymore for it. There's a phase transition to where these metaphors break. Yeah, you can't really. That's why it's a little bit unspeakable. This stuff is kind of the door, because I mean, imagine you get more and more and more quantum effects at a more and more greater macroscopic scale. So as the surface of all these membranes becomes in resonance with each other, from the nervous system and the heartbeat, all of a sudden they become quantumly entangled because they're moving at the same rate. So the whole body starts to behave as a single sort of condensate or a plasma in a way, because at any point in the body, all the charges are moving very far apart from each other. So it's basically the whole body gets these waves of being ionized very quickly, waves of ionization, which allows for a lot of freedom and energy harvesting and stuff as those waves go by. And so as this gets more and more coherent, it becomes more and more capable of picking up and tuning into and becoming sensitive to other things. So like really powerful healers and whatnot, Taoists, and they can become sensitive to your body because their antennas are functioning so wildly and basically just sort of like help chill out, calm everything down, and cause it to resonate. But everyone's doing this at every scale already, no matter what. Like anything that's getting people to sort of like have the same thing through this natural non-doing oscillation causes people to just kind of like link up. So anything that's like just causing rhythm and harmony is healing. So anything that's causing peace or harmony is healing just as much as like shooting magic chi out of your fingers. And there's different ways to cause harmony and rhythm. Anytime that you sort of try and destroy or get rid of a harmony, it leaves a, if you were to get rid of if you found a group of cells or whatever and decided to attack it, or people or anything, or whatever metaphor or scale you're going to be looking at, when you rip that out, it hurts other people. Like everyone cares about something in a different way. So any sort of offensive maneuver causes people to have these radically different experiences. Like war or anything, even if you shoot the bad guys or revolution or overthrowing anything, if you go after anybody anywhere, it just causes them to have, everyone around it has a different understanding or perspective of it, because everyone has a different idea of what's right or what solution should be had. And so no matter what, it causes you to it causes the different biological systems to fall out of resonance and harmony, and then it big old cascadey weighty thing going on. And all that's done through effort, which the effort's done by the brain. Like if the brain's expending effort to try and stabilize the system, then it's not acting as a resonant device. The resonant device can't try and stabilize the system. It has to be totally passive. The brain's the most powerful thing because it can tune into the most number of things. It's the most sensitive and delicate organ, the brain. Much more sensitive and delicate than the heart. But it's that way because it's so relaxed. It's almost like fluid rope. It's noodly woodly. And then the trying causes it to get really tangled in itself. Because hence the need for all the meditation and all that. But this is where we see electromagnetism, gravity, objects, and all these other spooky things, and spiritual realities, because we've got this mitochondria in us, and chloroplasts are in the plants. These, you could see the mitochondria in the chloroplasts as angels or whatever, or just spiritual beings, because they're littered throughout the cell, and they're where your metabolism comes. If food gets burned, it gets burned through the mitochondria, or burned, quote unquote, because they also have, in addition to having just one of these membranes, you have two of them. So they have a flux field here, and then they have a flux field on this internal membrane and some mitochondrial matrix. If you look at it by itself, it's a two-dimensional coil. And so this coil in the mitochondria is letting the membranes interact with each other the same way that DNA lets the DNA act with itself. And so these membranes are like touching such that the quantum effects are going to be altering this, and so you can get these like quantum waves going through these membranes, so that you're talking free energy devices here. But they also have bacterial DNA on the inside, and some of that bacterial DNA is in the nucleus. So a lot of the coding for the thing is in here, and it's in here. And since they're bacteria, they also resonate with other bacteria. So you have a lot of bacteria in your body that are going to have overlapping genes, like especially in your appendix. It's sort of a bacterial reservoir. So all of this stuff is having quantum effects, and it's entangled, and the DNA is entangled. So similar sequences of bacteria and yeast and all that. There's tons of yeast and other parasites in the body are all going to be entangled in this like quantum flux. So that DNA is also going to be part of your sense of self. And since it's part of your sense of self, it's got its own reality on here, on its own little surface. And these coils are going on. But they're in here, and they're floating around in the cytoplasm. They're very charged. Very charged because it's a coil. It's a two-dimensional coil, and there's hydrogen pumps and everything. So they're responding to all these electromagnetic vibrations, and they're also quantumly entangled with bacterial life. So they're tuned into all the bacterial life. So when you're channeling things and stuff, you got to look at how much bacterial DNA is around you versus how much of your DNA is around you. And the majority of the DNA that's happening right now is bacterial. So while this screen here is human reality, and if you're identified with the average of this human reality, then it seems like that's what's going on, but the bacterial stuff is really, what's actually going on. It's been here for billions of years, the bacterial reality. And so it's kind of like this larger reality is taking place inside of like that sort of thing. But there's no scale, right? So we're looking at, if you look at how these objects are created, like we're creating the scale of these objects. And we're kind of creating all of these ideas. So the reason that all of this seems to kind of like plug together and make sense, and how philosophy and objects and biology and physics and everything, how can you unify those things? Well, you're thinking about them, and so it's going to kind of look exactly how you're thinking. And your DNA, what's at the middle of you, is going to behave exactly how you're thinking and experiencing the world. So the biology actually mirrors the stuff that people find in meditation. Or when people smoke DMT or whatever, they go into deoxyribonucleic hyperspace. Or dreaming, where you're non-local. You can change your average of what you think is happening, and all that information is right here. Like everything, all the information from everything, because you zoom in and you identify with a different level, then you've got all of the crazy movement of all of the hydrogen atoms that are all wrapped together and moving the same way, are in resonance with all of these other hydrogen atoms. And so at this quantum scale, there's an infinite number of realities just in this symbol. There's an infinite number of perspectives that you could take just right here, and they overlap, and this is all, it's all real down there. All of this quantum entanglement and resonance and energy sharing and flowing and waves and chi and all that, like it's scientifically sort of factual. We see it. The reason we see it is because it's how we think. We can only see how we are. So with all of these different theories, like you're seeing exactly how you're thinking, but it's not like real. It's not like we're discovering a reality out there. Like science is not discovering anything. There's no like proof. You're just seeing exactly how you're thinking. And so myth, storytelling, music, everything is just as much of a valid representation of how things are as like science. So to teach things as sort of facts, when in reality, if you can think correctly, anything that you think is true. And so anything that you think is also possible, because when you look at what DNA can do, or how many realities can a single strand of DNA create? How many different, you've seen your DNA, right? Like, you look at your DNA, and then imagine from your time of birth until right now, how many different things have you experienced? Perceived, objects, seen, whatever. That's one set of DNA, just within you. Just having a relatively probably untrained life in meditation, probably, whatever. And you've seen that many different things. So there's that many different realities that can show up on this average sort of display device here. And then you think of how many different belief sets have you had, which is the middle ring of reality. And then how many different things have been influencing you from the outside, seemingly unseen, off the screen, so to speak. Those are all different spiritual realities. And then this stuff has different scales and sizes that go up and forever. But it's the only reason that it seems to go on forever and behave like a self-similar fractal and have any sort of whatever is because it's exactly how you're thinking. So when you see the conspiracy theories or the cages of reality, you're seeing what you're seeing. Like, if you only believe this is you, if you're one of these things and you think this is the only thing on there, you're going to be, oh my God, I'm in a matrix. And all I see is this screen and it's not real. Yeah, you're right. The brain is causing all of these imprints to be on this thing. None of those are real. It's the brain just saying that's what's there. And none of that's even real. That's just a picture that's showing up on a sphere. The sphere is real. And so, that's the oh my God, it's the hard truth of the matrix of the reality. And you're like, ugh. But at the same time, no, because there's an infinite number of changes. You're the average between all of these different cages, and they're not cages. They're infinite energy generation devices that are capable of anything. And you're not even that, because you're just... These things are the ones running the show and looking out. Like, these things are in direct contact and see both your thoughts and the world. In fact, the spiritual reality of all the things around you controlling you are like, to them, you are a thought. Right? Everything that you think is, you see the world's inside out right here. You can actually shift from this isolated DNA perspective to this distributed within one world. All of these mitochondria are extremely entangled, but they're not trapped inside the thoughts, and they're not, right? This is the 360 perspective of how both of this is happening at the same time. This is happening in your body. So these are meditative states you can fall into. And then the more all this is jiving, the more when the DNA expresses itself into proteins, all of that protein machinery stuff is not stressed quite as much. Everything enters and jives at that other level of reality that's supposed to be. But it's all just language, right? The language cuts apart everything up. It doesn't matter how you cut it up, it's going to behave in a self-similar way. So the physics and the biology and the philosophy and everything is going to always behave exactly how you're thinking. So that's why you get all these groups that are like, no, we're right, and this is the paradigm of us, because it's like, yeah, of course you're going to see reality exactly how you're thinking all the time, and it's always going to look that way. You're always going to think that you're right, because you're the only thing that's creating all of this with your thoughts. So anything that you think is right. So you can choose to think exactly how somebody else is thinking, and it won't make jack shit a difference to how the actual nature of reality works, except that if you're thinking exactly like another person is, you become quantumly entangled with them, and suddenly your intent is their intent. But how did you become quantumly entangled with them? You just let them be right. You literally love the person so much that you're right, and then all of a sudden, you don't really have any choice, because we're both making decisions now. But if you try and fight somebody, you have no say in what they're doing. And since none of this is none of this is physical or energetic or anything, so like when you fight somebody, it does absolutely nothing. The only way that you can change somebody is to actually merge with them such that your intent's stronger than their intent. But I'm not going to fight you because I need to actually be able to touch you to change anything that you're doing. So if you want to change somebody's mind, you actually have to resonate with their mind enough to actually change it, which means thinking like they do, which means actually having the same beliefs, which unfortunately all of them are wrong. So if you act off of what you believe, then you're going to be wrong no matter what. If you act off what you believe, if you believe believe whatever you need to believe to become in complete harmony with reality, and then you actually get to sort of influence it. Which that's easy to do with nature, but if the brain's malfunctioning and it's trying to resonate with itself, which doesn't exist, then it becomes difficult to resonate with other humans. The perception of there being other humans is the brain getting like caught in its own feedback loop. There's not anybody else because there is like no one else. So to try and like think of any solution other than having the thoughts that put you in the greatest amount of resonance with somebody, which means sort of serving them with your ideas or your presence or whatever, or just not, it's not about not fighting, or it's not about having the right ideas, it's not about like having virtues of compassion or anything. It's really the path or the way or the whatever is to try and come up with the thoughts that keep you in the greatest harmony and the greatest resonance with reality. At that point, you also have the greatest control because you're the same of it. So your intent changes what it's thinking. Hence all the manifestation, but you got to be like so clever and tricky because there's not anything that you did to enter into resonance with reality. You did whatever it was asking at the moment. Which in some points that might be like sitting on the cushion and being like, damn, I'm an enlightened monk. Like, whoa, I don't understand everything. The other one might be, I'm supposed to be a football player. And then if you're in the middle of like a riot or something like that, you probably need to like get your energy amped up and then slowly kind of like back and walk away at the same energy as everyone else. Like, it's about just doing anything you need to do and still maintaining your independence and your intent and your freedom enough, and that will like make it such that your reality changes, because none of it's all your reality. And not. So all the people are real, everything's real, they have their own intent. And then there's enough infinite space for you to tune into anything that you want to tune into. But when you fight something, you're tuned into intent that's not yours. You see, you can look at it from both ways. It's crazy. You can change your mind. So there's an infinite number of like ways to say it right, and there's an infinite number of ways to say it wrong. They look at it exactly the same. It's just a matter of is it in tune with what's happening or not? Does it cause increased resonance or not?